All right, we are live. Lewis, are you ready to do this?
Yes, sir, Stetson.
Awesome. Welcome to our viewers tuning in live today with Lewis Pope, head nerd at Enable, and myself, Stetson Blake, with This is an IT Support Group and IT MSP Entrepreneurs. We're going to be chatting about MDR, or Managed Detection and Response, today. Lewis, for folks that haven't tuned in before to hear you speak about these security topics, maybe you could give just a brief intro of who you are and what you're up to.
Yep. So I am with Enable as one of the head nerds. We are subject matter experts that are, for the most part, we've been living, breathing, and eating the MSP channel for some of us, the past 20 years. So we have been in the MSP space. We're not just on the vendor side. We actually have been in the trenches, understand the challenges, the problems, what works, what doesn't work. But my role is just advocacy and education, helping our partners with best practices, implementing basic security controls, sometimes not basic security controls. But our role with Enable is to make sure our partners are able to get more done with less.
Great intro. Couldn't have said it any better myself. And of course, viewers are probably familiar with myself. Founded This is an IT Support Group, and just passionate about IT education. And so, yeah, today I was actually getting a little distracted, Lewis, looking at your ever-changing background on StreamYard here. I see you have, is that Loki and maybe a Squishmallow?
Yeah, Loki over here and a Godzilla Squishmallow now.
Killer.
So
did you see the new Godzilla?
Zero. Yes, it was a
Very
return to form. I have been very much enjoying what Toho has been putting out recently. I got Zero and Shin Godzilla, perfect. It was great to see Godzilla movies go back to being Godzilla movies for me.
Totally agree, and we won't spend too much time on the Godzilla small talk, but yeah, I haven't seen the other one, but I saw Godzilla Zero. We'll recommend it. But before we get into MDR, which is of course our main topic today, Lewis, there's a couple new security things happening in the news I'd like to chat with you about. So the first is that Microsoft has recently announced the Midnight Blizzard, or Nobelium EPT 29, compromise of Microsoft executive email accounts and other organizations. So this is Microsoft saying that their business is experienced a compromise in the very products that they create and are supposed to be experts on. Can you give us a little bit of background here? What's happened and what's kind of the takeaway for those that might have smaller security operations to defend against nation state backed threat actors?
Right. Yeah. So this is one of those whenever it makes you step back and it says, wow, if the people that are responsible for the product, who create it, who are giving us the best practices and the guidance for it, if they're doing it wrong, what's our chances of doing it right? Um, and reading the postmortem on it, it ended up being that there was an unprotected non-production account out there somewhere that did not have multi-factor authentication enabled for it. That opened it up for brute force attacks, but they did it nice and slow and low. They did it at a rate that it didn't raise suspicion. And then once they had access to that non-MFA protected account, they were able to make lateral movement within. Uh, they were able to make lateral movement because of OAuth applications. They were able to create other pairings of OAuth applications, adding them into the system to aid them in their lateral movement so they could get into more and more of the systems, which eventually wound up with them being able to access some high level executive accounts, emails, probably more. We don't know. Um, but Microsoft also uncovered that this attack was not just for them. They saw other organizations that also suffered from this same type of attack where they would gain that initial access and then they would use OAuth applications and the ability to provision out new ones to make those movements across the infrastructure. And the for those are like, okay, that does sound complicated. It's like, why would my client suffer from this? And the answer is, well, it's not that complicated for a rehearsed team that does it all the time, or for somebody that's just following a set of instructions that's already been defined for them that they've, purchased as part of an X as a service or a ransomware as a service playbook. So it is a good example of, hey, even the big guys can get it wrong with even the most simple of things. It was they did not have MFA enabled on an account. Um,
Yeah, that's quite eye opening. And
exactly. So it's
we
one of those things of make sure it doesn't matter at this point in time. It almost does not matter if it is a privileged account or a regular account. It should have MFA enabled on it. Also, you also have to, go back and, well, do audits of your configurations. Make sure you don't have the ability to provision, a unprivileged user account doesn't have the ability to provision out potentially sensitive privileges.
Yeah, and we have a comment here from Tuan who says, "Don't have the people who make the product tell you how to protect such a product. Even
Yeah,
AWS, Azure, Microsoft as well, as we're seeing, tells you that it's shared responsibility, meaning they give you the platform, but security is your problem."
right.
Uh,
And that's kind of the standard, from the, whenever you consider proper risk management, it is, it's the whenever you buy something from somebody that is something as a service, yeah, sure, they're responsible for the security of the underlying hardware and the hosting infrastructure and everything else. But once you're into that product, that service as a service, whatever it happens to be, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's now up to you to use it responsibly. We're not going to tell you here's some best practices and guidelines, but we're not going to share in the responsibility of managing it. And there are vendors that are putting a little bit more effort into that than what they used to back in the day. But it generally has been an offhands approach of once we sell you the solution, it's up to you to use it and manage it correctly.
yeah, and I'm sure we'll see more attacks like this in the future. So, yeah, again, as I said, eye opening. Folks making these products are, perhaps not able to always secure them.
It's
And
that it's, yeah, I don't want to say it's the consequences of shadow IT. But it's just the consequence of not the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing in large organizations.
Yeah, disorganization, which plagues everybody, unfortunately. But yeah, I'll encourage folks again, as we showed Tuan's comment here. Go ahead, ask questions, comments. We can pop them up in the live stream here. It's quite fun to field some of those. Um, Lewis, moving on to another topic that recently happened. I don't know if folks read about this, but the SEC, or Securities and Exchange Commission, recently lost control of their Twitter account, or X. I'll say Twitter forever. I don't even care. uh, so this is, just a public relations faux pas, perhaps. But what's the takeaway here for our audience about how they lost control of this account?
Well, yeah, so they lost control of this account because of social engineering, insider threats of a third party service provider. It was a SIM swap attack. Um, they found out the phone number, little reconnaissance. They found out the phone number that was associated with that Twitter account, and they went to the I don't remember which carrier it was, but they went to the carrier that held that number and did a standard SIM swap attack. They either went in and paid somebody off at a regional store. They had an inside guy that could do the SIM, whatever it was. It was just a simple, we've now done a SIM swap. Your phone number is now attached to this SIM card. I'm going to put it in this phone. I'm going to request an account reset, and bam, all of that reset information has now come to this phone number for authentication. So it just highlights the weakness of authentication being tied to a phone number, because phone numbers are one of those things that you absolutely positively do not control. That is the way that the system works. You don't really control it or own it. There are hundreds of thousands of people probably within telecom that can say, I'm going to move this phone number off of here and make it call this device through SIM swaps, other things. And you really can't control that. So it's a really good example of this is why you do not use text or phone calls as part of an MFA, especially
Yeah.
not an automated MFA.
Yeah, and so in this case, it's the mitigation. Again, you highlighted this is something you can't really control. It sounds like more of a fault, perhaps, of X or Twitter in their design for that
It
MFA.
is not, from a security point of view, it is not a good practice to even offer any type of MFA or authentication via phone number, because it can be defeated, and you're kind of it. It's one of those. For me, it's a false sense of security that you're providing to somebody by saying, "Hey, here's an MFA, but it's tied to a phone number."
For sure.
Now,
Yeah, and we
I would
we
definitely
have
have, like, somebody calls for a request on an MFA reset. You're going to have your own internal controls and policies about we need these identifying info pieces of information and everything. And a phone number can be an important part of that, but for me, it can't or shouldn't be part of an automated MFA or account reset process.
For sure. And we've got a comment here from Ben Rowland. I've seen his name pop up before, saying pros and cons using Google VoIP versus traditional SIM. And I think
Woo.
he's probably not asking about the features, but maybe more so, can Google voice or VoIP services be attacked
Well,
through SIM
yeah,
swapping?
that's another one of those things of you're relying on. So you're using a Google VoIP, so you got a Google phone number, or you got a number associated with through them. Well, okay, cool. They've got that number, they're control, but what you're going to go register to other services and other things with that number. Now you have all those privileged accounts, those bank accounts, those privileged access into your clients, whatever it is. They're now tied up with that phone number, and I've lost Google VoIP phones numbers before. I've had them ported out without my consent. How, when, what happened, I don't really know, but I have lost control over those numbers before. So it's kind of that same weakness.
For sure.
You're relying on, so if you've got an email address, sure, your registrar is out there representing you to the world, but for the most, you still own that domain. address, and nobody can take that domain address away from you except, buying it from you, court
Right.
order, some other things. That you don't just kind of lose that. But with the phone numbers, it's just so it's one of those that is technically feasible. There are securities and controls in place, but they get defeated all the time. So
Yeah, definitely something good to keep up on. Although I'd love to get into the technicalities and features of SIM swapping attacks today, I think we should move on a little bit and chat about MDR. Um, Lewis, maybe a good point. Should we just start by defining what MDR is?
right. So there's always the acronym soup in IT. It gets even worse in
Yes,
IT security.
I need a glossary.
Yeah. So there is MDR, which is managed detection and response, which is separate from managed endpoint detection and response, which is also related to XDR. So you've got all of these things. So managed detection and response is the overall general principle of you are going to use multiple different technologies to perform your detection of events, provide remediation and response to those events, and having somebody manage that for you. I mean, that's the simplest way of breaking it down. You don't get MDR without XDR and MEDR as well, though. They're kind of subsets of it.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just reading over some notes here. I'm trying to grapple with it myself because we have this phrase or acronym MDR and then MEDR. These are the same, right? Managed detection and response and managed endpoint detection and response. Did I get that right?
So it's the same in that it's managed, but managed endpoint detection and response is only focused on the endpoint. It's focusing on the security events that are being triggered and happening on the endpoint, whether that's being generated by an endpoint protection platform or endpoint detection and response solutions that is sitting there and doing the behavior analytics on the endpoint, monitoring for what happens, alerting you from malware, ransomware detections, things like that. But it's wholly encompassed to only dealing with the endpoint. So it is the natural evolution of what we got after AV was endpoint detection and response, and then the M is just somebody is managing it for you. Um, MDR is taking out the endpoint part of it because it's just saying, yeah, well, it's everything. Whatever you need, whatever you have. If it's firewall logs, it's AWS events, it is M365 events, whatever it may be. All of that's being collected into one centralized location. It's being processed and alerted on, uh, having the automation flowing from that. So if you have something like, and I guess this is probably the easiest example of what it is and why it's important, because there's always the what is something, but then there's the well, why do I care why it's important side of it is if you've only traditionally been working on endpoint security, there's that whole world outside of that network that you don't touch, you don't address, you usually aren't monitoring. You're just worrying about what makes it into the business. Well, what constitutes making it into the business is not what it used to be. That's no longer, oh, somebody got inside of your local, network at the business's physical location. It's they've gained access to an account somewhere that's with a cloud service somewhere. So you have a user. They log in at 7 o'clock p.m. to M365 from their home office somewhere in Maine in America. Well, at midnight, all of a sudden you see that same user logging in from an IP address somewhere in Europe. Well, that's going to be classified as impossible travel. There's no way for that user to have logged in from here and then out to somewhere else. If you are not looking and monitoring for that in real time as it is happening, it's one of those, yeah, sure, I can go look at the logs and I can figure it out that happened. And I can use that information to explain why things might have gone sideways. But unless I'm doing something about it, then there and that point, it's just digital forensics investigation, being able to go back and find out that it happened. MDR is about monitoring for that as it happens, seeing when it happens, and automating your response for it so that as soon as that occurs, you can have a well defined automated playbook that comes in and says, all right, we're going to lock down, we're going to terminate all open sessions for that user. We're also going to remove that user's permissions from the local AD. We're going to lock them down. We're going to drop them into a highly restricted security group so that they basically can't do anything more while we figure out what's going on. We're also going to first a password reset, whether that's going to be out to M365, AWS through AD Sync, because we're also going to have that propagated out to any federated services that are attached to the AD. But it's about that automation, seeing it that it happened, taking those actions and making it happen, not just out on the cloud, but also down on the individual endpoints as well. That's what MDR goes beyond what MEDR does and what XDR does. Because XDR is expanded detection and response. It's been the buzzword. It's like it's always been, oh, you don't need endpoint protection. You need XDR. And that's the thing that's been hammered on for past few years. But if you are a under provisioned team, you're under resourced for whatever reason, just consuming an XDR service is usually not enough, because even if you consume an XDR service, it's like, great, I have a way to bring in and ingest all of these events from all of these different locations, from firewalls, from a cloud service, from the endpoints. But then there's the continual improvement phase that somebody has to sit around and write new rules and new detections based on the threats that are actively out there happening in the real world. And that is a full-time job, not for an individual. That is a full-time job for a team. It's not
Sure.
something that you can just tap somebody on your shoulder and say, you know what, you're really good. You're focused on security. You enjoy it. We're going to have you writing all of the detection rules now.
Here you go. Have
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Should take
If
you a
you
week,
did
right?
not, yeah, if you didn't tell them that's all you're doing all day, every day, they're, I mean, they might do some good, cool stuff, but they're not going to be able to keep up.
Yeah.
That's
Can't.
where an MDR service really has to, I think that's the value in an MDR service. You don't have to staff up. You don't have to find the people with the skills, um, with the experience, with the technical knowledge. You don't have to worry
Sure.
about
Yeah.
finding them in the first place, and you don't have to worry about finding enough of them, because
Yeah.
if
And to be clear, Lewis, that
Mhm.
this MDR service, this is actual real people responding and
Right,
monitoring, just
yeah, so
not
it's
ones
not
that. Yeah.
right, yeah, because that's what you get with a lot of security as a service platforms nowadays is a bunch of automated response stuff, which is good. That is great, but they're not looking at it anymore after they're alerting that they have set up as triggered and done the automations. That's it. They're not further investigating it. They're not making recommendations for you. That's the what they term the difference between little R and big R in digital forensics investigations and incident response management. It's
Little R and big R. Can you dive deeper on that? I've never
right.
heard that
So
term.
there is a term that's borrowed from it's a term that was borrowed from another industry,
From
but
finance, right?
yep, from finance. But in the IT and security world, it is little R is that automated remediation. That yep, we locked yep, the account failed login 5 times and it was closed for you. And then
Interesting.
that's all
And
you
this is
get.
risk, is what the R stands for. Is that right?
Well, in our terms, it can be risk, but we're talking about more in the difference between remediations. So it's little
Yeah.
remediation, big remediation. Little R remediation is that, yeah, the account failed, 5 login attempts, close the account. Big
Okay.
R is, oh, we saw that happen, and then we performed some additional investigation. We saw where the IP address was originating from that was trying to make that login. We're going to push that through our threat intelligence resource database that the service has to check that against other known campaigns. And then we're going to take that information and use it to push down to your firewalls to block access to those IP addresses, modify the ACLs or block lists to add that block for that newly discovered, attack, because attackers rotate IP addresses
Sure.
constantly.
Pretty easy, I
So,
imagine.
right. So you
There's a lot
can't,
of them, I think.
there are, yeah. And you can't just block a static list of IP address once a month. That does you something, but isn't good enough. That isn't going to
Not
stop
dynamic
an
enough,
attack while it's happening.
for
So
sure.
that's one of those. There's a lot more examples of that difference between little r and big R, but that's kind of what it is. And it's just speaks to the challenge in the MSP channel space of being able to take in all of these logs and events from these completely non-similar
Sprawled
clients.
places. Yeah,
Exactly. Organize it, standardize it in one location, and that is hard to keep up with. And a lot of services have made their answer for keeping up with it has been, automate, 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 which is good. That is desirable.
sure.
But they're forced to automate because they don't have the resources to do the big R. And that's what one of the nice things about the Enable MDR service we're bringing out is it's going to give you more of that big R, that actual, not just the system automatically responded and sent you a cookie cutter response. It's no, there's a team that looked at it, investigated it, and is making additional recommendations for you. So you're not
Responding and
stuck
yeah.
figuring it out yourself. And that's the worst feeling in the world as even if you're not security, you're IT literate, you're a great sysadmin, been doing it for years, and you get a security alert from your software solution and you don't understand what it means. That's a horrible feeling because you're like, okay, I've got no way to judge this. How serious is this? You can have EPSS scores, other types of metrics to try to tell you how bad it is. But if you don't know, you're operating blind. I like this type of service because it gives you that peace of mind. You don't have to panic. You don't have to
Yeah,
sit there and know if I don't figure this out, then nobody's figuring it out.
yeah, that peace of mind is certainly worth a lot. Lewis, one question I have is it's popping up here. We had a comment again from Tuan saying most public sector requires MDR nowadays. And MDR can also affect your cyber insurance. That's cheaper to have it than not. My question that kind of leads off from that is maybe at what point should companies start thinking about MDR? What type of like how big or
Okay,
yeah,
so for me, the answer is everybody. But there is always the financial and the business evaluation and the risk management evaluation that goes in that says, hey, we can't spend that much because the risk mitigation it provides doesn't make up for the potential losses we would experience. So there's no reason for a small business that only makes $2 million a year to spend $200,000 on IT security. So that's been the challenge that has kept businesses of all sizes from consuming something like this because the cost was prohibitive. Now, with what we're offering with Enable MDR, it's almost a don't question it, put your clients on it. It is a risk, it is now achievable as a proper risk mitigation that does make sense whenever you start doing your annualized, uh, your event loss uh, percentage, how often it's going to happen, how much could it potentially cost you. You can almost not worry about those calculations anymore with this service because it's at a price point that's standardized that you can get your clients in on. And it's not I know a lot of smaller MSPs that always have that complication of, yeah, I charge my clients like $35 a month per user, and they'll never pay me the $200 a month I need to do proper security. This gets me now to, I'm like, okay, that's fine. You might not be able to make as nice of a margin as you could as other MSPs that are more confident in going upstream after larger clients, but there's now not there is no longer a reason for you to not offer it down market anymore. The
For
price
sure.
works. It's not prohibitive. Your clients will actually be able to afford this. And the great thing about it, and another great thing is that it is not an additional cost for you. If you were going to stand up and staff an MDR service yourself and resell it, well, that's 24/7 staffing, that's skilled individuals, that's specialized knowledge, that's, $90,000 per employee per year, and you're going to need 6 to 8 of them to get started.
Yeah.
This
Plus
gets you down
tax,
into,
healthcare.
nope, pay a monthly price and get it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a super compelling offer. I'm really curious to hear about that. I do want to highlight another comment we got from a longtime friend Ed Ned. Of course, price is a feature of selecting an MDR service provider, but Ed is curious. What are some other features that might be crucial to look out for when you're kind of vetting some of these services?
Okay, so I think one of the first biggest things to find out, are you siloed on specific equipment stacks or services? And if they are siloed, is there a path to have additional things added to what it can ingest? Um, because I mean that takes research and development. It takes time to do it in the first place. It takes time to keep it up, and um, a lot of the MDR services that are out there are very narrowed on what they're going to do. Intentionally with Enable MDR, there's not that narrow scope. It doesn't matter your firewall vendor. It doesn't matter if you're AWS, Azure, whatever it may be. Um, we're going to be able to ingest, whether it's via API, syslog. There is going to be a way to get that information into Enable MDR so that it can be monitored, alerted, and have actions taken off of it. So that's like the first big thing. Next big thing I would probably say is just, what is the breadth of it? So are they only going to bring those events in and alert you about it and give you those kind of like, standard, yeah, okay, we saw too many login attempts and we're going to lock that account? Or is it that broader orchestration? I know we can go across the estate, down into everything, and find where that user was, lock them down, lock out their sessions, add the additional security controls into the firewall. Can it go that far down that remediation path for you without you having to do it? Because a lot of times your NVR services will tell you, yep, this event happened. Here's all the detailed information. You should go use this additional security information somewhere. They don't do it for you. That's back to that little R, big R. We're giving you that
Awesome.
big R. You don't have to have somebody on your team figure out, okay, how am I going to go make these security changes they're recommending? It's automated into the platform. Also, making sure that, is dark web already included in it, or is that something else you have to add in and bring in as an outside source? Um, uh, Compliancy, does it have any compliancy hook ins or not? Whether that's just as simple as having a guided form that helps you fill out what the questionnaires are that come with compliance. I think another really big thing to consider with choosing an MDR solution is the I don't want to say the quality of the platform as a whole. There's always that, okay, this thing's good and this thing's not so good, so I can sacrifice that one for the other. But I think you have to see that the product is a growing service. It's not a
Sure.
flat thing, because you can sit down, hire a bunch of people, build an MDR service, and then fire half the people and start selling the service.
Yeah.
But
You're going to see that dedication to building and maintaining
right,
the
because
platform.
otherwise it's behind in a year or two, and you have to.
Sure.
Right. So I think that's the bigger things there. Also, is, can you get into the raw data yourself as well? There are services out there where it's in their incentive, because the way it is built, to say, all right, here are the reports, here are the executive summaries, here are the alerts we are sending you. Consume these, but they don't give you any access to the actual
Uh,
platform
it's
or
obscured.
tool.
Yeah,
So
that
what
makes
we're
sense.
doing with the Enable MDR is you get the platform, you get the full login, even though we have the MDR service there that is doing the work for you, and you're consuming and benefiting from that service, we're not keeping you out of it. You can still go in and you can see it. You can see the ongoing investigations. You can add notes into the investigations. You can work back and forth with them. You can um, just so much of what you, well, one, you get the full platform. So if you have the skills, you can go in and you can take advantage of it. But you don't have to have the skills to take advantage of it. So you can grow into it over the time. Maybe you decide that, hey, yeah, I do want to internalize this down the road. Well, if you do, great. There's lots of awesome opportunities for that. But to get started, it's almost impossible to get started unless you already have a ridiculous amount of resources available. This
Sure.
gets you, I mean, 90 minutes, you have a client onboarded with it and it's going and it's working.
Whoa, that's
And
quick.
you yeah, and you didn't have to, all right, how am I going to ingest logs from this firewall appliance? How am I going to write rules for these types of firewall appliances? How do I ingest from AWS? What events are important in AWS? What is an important correlation between my firewall and AWS? Uh, that is a lot. That is massive. That is more work than just being a normal MSP, I think.
Yeah, that's a team for sure. I
So
do want to highlight quick, good context. Firstly, Ed, Ned, I hope that answered your question on kind of some of the features to evaluate on these MDR solutions. But I do want to highlight this question from Jared asking: Is this service that we're talking about today, is this Vigilance or is this a separate product?
right. So yeah, so Vigilance is our MEDR. So that's the managed endpoint detection and response. And this is one of those, well, what does the risk profile of your client base and your individual clients represent? Um, if the business case and the risk management evaluation goes through and it says, hey, all we really need to worry about is the protection of the endpoints because we're not using any cloud services. It's, very stripped down. Everybody's operating through one web portal, through a line of business application, and that's it. There might be a case for, okay, they only need endpoint security, and that needs to be managed by somebody. Um, and there are those situations, but the enable MDR is going to be everything. It's whatever you can throw into it can be monitored. Again, AWS, Azure event security logs, endpoint events, firewall appliances, all kinds of things can be brought into it. And that sounds expensive, but believe me, it is. We have went through a lot of effort to make this something that works for the MSP channel.
Yeah, it certainly again sounds compelling. I do want to highlight this question. It's a bit off topic, but it's from ISMD device asking, does Enable have any automation to detect IT infrastructure outages towards LAN, WAN, ISPs, and tier one ISPs?
Oh, yeah. So yes and no. Well, actually, it's yes, 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 and kind of a yes.
Nice.
So if you're inside of our Insight or Essential platforms, and you have uh, the network topology discovery available, that's one part. Inside of Insight and Essential, there's ability to do overdue checks for connectivity to certain types of equipment, to appliances, to network infrastructure, and get warnings alerts when they're not available. Um, there's NetPath, which is another feature that is inside of Essential and Insight that can do external mapping of, what is the path that is taken to get from one resource to another resource over the internet. So we have
Awesome.
some things that can aid in that, but we don't have like that one monolithic product that is specifically just for that.
For sure. Thanks for covering that. ISMD device. Hopefully that answers your question. We can definitely get you in touch with somebody at Enable if you have further questions there. Lewis, I do want to move on. You mentioned earlier, one of the core features you might look for would be deep web and dark web monitoring services. Now, at this point, these services have been around for a few years. Some may see it as kind of a foundational security control that everyone needs, and others might have the viewpoint that it's unnecessary if you have proper security controls in place already. For those that don't see it as needed, why do you think they have that perception? And add-on question: does Enable have dark web monitor?
Yeah, so it is for the first way that dark web monitoring was sold as a thing, as a service. It was just credential compromise. We saw your credentials for an email for sale in a database somewhere. And if that's what you know dark web monitoring for, you're going to be like, well, I've got MFA enabled. I have good password rotation policies in place. My users are using a password generator or a password manager. So we know they're using securely generated passwords and they're not reusing credentials, or even that, nah, we solved all this. Everybody's using RFIDs, UB keys, whatever. Um, Great. That is wonderful security controls that you have in place. But dark web monitoring has become more than that. It can also let you know about, you can, it's not just those user accounts, it's those privileged accounts, it's the infrastructure information, it's the other things that might have found their way to the dark web, such as enumerations of your network information. Maybe you were compromised by a data access broker at some point. And now that data access broker is out there selling information about, hey, $5 million company, ports that are open. We have this available. Do you want it for 30 bucks?
And that happens frequently, right?
Exactly. So that's where dark web monitoring now, what you need it for today. It's not, still it has its value and its place to play around just credentials for, email accounts that have been compromised, for third party, worried about password reuse for users. But I think that additional, is there other indicators on the dark web, on the deep web that says, hey, we've got more than just credentials. We have valid information about how we operate, how our infrastructure is set up. And there's a glaring, obvious, hey, they're out there announcing that we got this RDP port that's exposed out to the internet. That's about to get absolutely blown up. We should probably do something about that.
Close 3389. The public
Yeah.
service announce.
Oh,
Well
no,
done.
no, no. They were smart and they did a little registry editing, and it's not going to 3389. It's going to another port because that'll protect them.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Security by obscurity, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Good to hear on dark website. Lewis, one of the things I've been thinking about, I've ran into this issue before, but sometimes you'll get just kind of a simple security question from either a client, insurer, or auditor. And teams can be a little bit in a panic trying to figure out how to answer the question. And if the answer that they provided is going to be a good or bad answer. Curious what enables MDR can do to help teams that have challenges with these questions because they might currently have bad answers to those questions. For example, do you centrally collect and monitor security events 24/7?
Yeah, and that is, we had a question earlier, or a comment earlier about the ability of MDR solutions to lower insurance rates enough that it makes up for the cost of whatever the MDR solution is. And the answers you provide on those are, I mean, if it's an insurance auditor or an underwriter, there's a point scale they're working with, and if you're not doing something, it makes the insurance more expensive, and if you are doing something, it makes the insurance a little bit cheaper. And as part of that process, whenever they're doing that, that it's kind of hard to say, I don't want to answer that question that way because I know if I answer the question this way, the client's insurance is going to go up. But then I also have to tell the client, well, your insurance is going to go up because I'm not doing the security best practice. And then that gets you, well, why aren't you doing that security best practice for us? And it usually becomes either I tried to sell you this service a year ago or 2 years ago, and you didn't want to take it because it was too expensive or because you didn't think you needed it. That's a lot of times what it ends up coming back to. Um, whether that's, we're not doing centralized logging and collection of security event information, that collection and events generation of security events isn't being monitored by somebody 24/7, because that's a lot of what the insurance is now asking for. They want SOC operations, they want knock operations, they want 24/7 eyes on dashboard looking at these things. And it's that same, it's the financials of it all. That's not going to fly for a lot of small businesses, that small businesses or small office, home offices that are being supported by MSPs, whether you're a smaller MSP, mid market MSP, maybe you're just still in the IT consultant role, on the break fix side of things, whatever. The financials have always kept that out of reach, because you could not do that in a way that could make it affordable, because it took too many it took too many bodies. It took too many people on the payroll to get the work done. With Enable's MDR, this is a situation where I could sit down and figure out how I could go right back into the MSP space myself, and just alone as myself start selling high end quality MSP services,
Yeah,
because
I love that.
the price comes down to something that it makes it possible. And that's always, when you're in sales, you're in marketing, you're in the business and the vendor side, there's always the, what are people willing to pay? What's the value of an offering? But sometimes it kind of gets lost that there's just a whole market there's a downstream market where the price is always going to be the barrier to entry.
Sure.
And this is one of the first times where I'm kind of confident in seeing something in the MSP channel that it is a price point that is taking care of enough of these things with that big R remediation in it, that I would be confident enough to say I could do this myself by myself. Because the other solutions that just do the little R, it's like, okay, I'm going to get this alert, and then I'm going to have to spend the next 5 hours trying to figure out how to deal with this. And that's 5 hours of me being, being locked into one thing instead of dealing with everything else that I need to deal with.
Yeah, I super love that. Being an entrepreneur myself, having done some consulting and running an MSP for a little while, it's super enticing to make that entrepreneurial leap, knowing that some of these new opportunities are opening up just to do more with less manpower, less resources.
Commoditization of solutions. It's the same. Um, One of the things I started kind of harping on 2 years ago was it is cheaper and easier to start a ransomware as a business with a nice, polished internet presence. It's easier and cheaper to do that nowadays than it is to start up an MSP. Now
Yeah,
I'm back into the, you know what? It's not, it's, we're getting the inverse of it back to, it might actually be cheaper to start a legitimate, very well secured MSP without it being one of those impossible things that makes you go, hey, it's just cheaper to do ransomware instead.
yeah,
So
I love that.
opportunities are going to be a lot broader for um, everybody, I think, with this type of a service. Whether you are, the entrepreneur that wants to make that switch up, you've been in IT, whether it's you've been in internal IT for years, and you want to make that jump out and be your own business owner. This is 2 or 3 years jumping ahead on capabilities. Because if
Yeah,
you're that individual that wants to, I want to run my own business, it's like, okay, you want to run your own business, you want to be IT focused, you want to provide services, you're going to hire that first guy. Just hiring that first guy is a mountain when you're first starting
yes,
out. There's no way for you to contend with the services that established MSPs are offering nowadays, unless you've got something like the commoditized MDR service that Enable is starting to offer, because the financials just doesn't work out for the small MSP or the entrepreneur. But now I think it does.
for sure. And Lewis, you sent me something a little bit earlier. I'm
Mhm.
always a fan because you don't send slide decks. You send one photo We've got one photo. I want to go deeper and ask a little bit what's going on in this photo. It looks like a chart here maybe of how some of this MDR stuff works.
Yeah, yeah. So this is just showing, how what is the flow here, and that biggest thing for me is it's over on the left is all of the things that we are able to ingest from. Because if you just think about the time and effort it takes to just ingest syslog events, that's days,
Yes,
weeks. You got to
lots
figure
of
out a
corruption.
tool. You got to figure out where you're going to store these logs. I mean, that is again, that is each one of those represents days, if not weeks, if not months of just figuring out how to get them, where to store them, and not even necessarily how to parse them and read through them. So that's one problem we're solving for you. Then you get into the ingesting those all into one central location. That's another challenge because you can get that information from each individual one, get them stored anywhere somewhere, but then how do you make that all visible in one location? And then enriching that. So taking all that information that's available, making sense of it because of the automations, the eyes that are on the dashboard, the experience of those security analysts that are looking at the events. Um, Being able to run that information against uh, threat information resources so that you're leveraging the knowledge and the experience and what's happening in the wider threat intelligence community to make your detection capabilities better. And then there's hunting. This is an entirely different thing that most MSPs never even have the opportunity to get to, even the bigger ones, the more mature ones. This is the active the active process of somebody sitting down, looking at the threat intelligence feeds that are coming out from from the different resources that provide them, whether it's stuff that's being provided by CISA, other three and four letter acronym organizations, the information of other security vendors and researchers, taking that and figuring out these are the active campaigns that are happening right now, and this is how we can find those campaigns, and then going searching through all of that information that's been ingested from the left and writing the queries, writing the rules, writing the correlations that are going to help them find those types of things. um, and then the ability to contain. So whether it's because of that enriched data and the automation to detect it, whether it was a part of the threat hunting exercises that were being done, the ability to contain it and take action and remediate it. Um, Whether that's going to be any of these actions that are over here on the right, the ability to lock down accounts, write down, to discover what other privileged access a compromised account might have had. Sure, that the original discovery event might have happened over in an Azure workload for a certain credential, but then being able to look down into the AD and down into local infrastructure where that user may also exist and taking actions there. And being able to have that as automated responses plus that difference between big R and little r, and then their ability to report on this and the ability to see it as it is happening and getting alerted as it is happening and being able to engage with the team as they are doing all of this stuff so you're not left in the dark. um I mean, this right here, if you sit down and, again, from the entrepreneurial point of view, you're a one-man operation, two-man operation, hell, 10-man operation. This probably represents a bunch of stuff you can't do. And that's not a disparagement against anybody. I
There's a
mean,
lot here.
yeah, yeah, there's a lot here. I know I was with my MSP for 6 years, and there's like, yeah, I could do 10% of this. So, and I could do 10% of it and not pull my hair out every day and, have nightmares, heartburn, and lose sleep. So this just represents that commoditization of all of these different things, all of these services, all of these technical capabilities, all of these processes. and the ability to reach into this just giant data lake of information and be able to say, we can understand and find the tactics, techniques, and processes that are being used by threat actors to do whatever they are going to be doing. I don't think it's always one of those things that's hard to get the value of this across to somebody that doesn't understand the complexity of these individual items. But whenever you sit down and you actually work out how hard is it to do each one of these individual things, it's like, okay, yeah, I have to consume this as a service because the I don't want to say the hard answer, the uncomfortable answer is that sometimes it's just you have to take the ego hit and say, okay, I can't do this. I'm just going to consume this as a service, and I understand that. For a while, I absolutely refused to engage with MSSPs whenever I was back with my MSP because it's like you're a
Why is
threat.
that?
Because
Ah, yeah,
you're gonna come in, I'm gonna consume this security offering from you, and you're gonna show my client everything I was doing wrong, and you're gonna take them away from me. I mean, that is not the model that an MSSP runs off of, but that's the fear that I had. Don't have that fear anymore. I understand from the business side that's not a healthy way from them to operate because they don't want to do MSP services. But this makes that even easier. It's not an MSSP that's offering some detection and response and some remediation services. It's one single consolidated service from a channel vendor that has no interest whatsoever in taking your client base from you. So you can get rid of that entire um, you're able to bypass that entire, I don't want to say objection, but that fear that I'm going to involve
sure.
this external third party and they're going to tell my client everything I'm doing wrong. That is
Yeah,
not the purpose of it. Gets you past that quickly. Um, and again, 90 minutes is about as long as it takes to get smaller organizations set up in it. So it's not this another thing. It's like, I can't do this because I can't spend 2 weeks working on this
sure.
and not making money on other clients. And this
I yeah, I'd call 90 minutes pretty quick.
it is and is,
That's
and it's
pretty
and I
awesome.
there's all that. Well, how can it take that long? Well, I mean, if you got an RMM solution already in place, or you have a GPO or AD, or however you got systems under management, it's trivial to push the agent down to the endpoints, and then it's trivial to get all of the other, your AWS, your Azure, anything else synced into it. Sure, yeah, you got a bunch of random firewalls sitting out there, and you don't have any way to set up a collector for it, and you got to have that little of a negotiation and a back and forth with your client of, hey, I need to put a collector in your environment so it can start consuming this information from our firewall. That might be an extra step that you have to pause things and go back to them later to discuss, but the actual work of it is really fast. It does not take long in the console to get it done.
Love that so much. Lewis, this has been an awesome conversation. We're coming up just right on an hour, so we're pretty dang good at our time management. But if folks want to learn more about Enable's managed detection and response service, where can they do so? Can they reach out to you? What's good next step?
Yep. So if you want a more of a technical deep dive, or you want those, just tell me, can it do X, Y, Z? I'm not interested in anything else. Feel free, reach out to me, lewis.pope@enable.com. Also, there is a link that was shared out earlier, I believe, in the chat, which would be a good if you want to get the sales and marketing front end exposure of it. That's a good way to kind of get a quick introduction, a bullet list of functionalities and capabilities that you can take and hand off to decision makers. So if you're not the decision maker, but you're sitting there saying, "Hey, this solves so many of our issues," a great place to go grab some additional information and put it in front of those that need to see it.
Fantastic. Lewis, it is always a pleasure to chat with you. I especially love our discussions on anything security related. Again, we've got links down below, I think in the YouTube comments as well. And yeah, we're gonna blow your email up. That's the goal. Maybe folks can just you know, email you 2 a.m. Hey, Lewis, it's all burning down. What do we do? But I think we'll call it there.
I'll surprise some people by answering it that or late. So, you know, I won't be. I will not have my feelings hurt if you send me emails that late.
Killer. Awesome. Lewis, we look forward to chatting with you again. If folks want to see these discussions, give us comments, feedback. We'll catch you on the next one. See ya.